Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio no pictures live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about election anomalies and how they only ever seem to go in one direction. Now I've gone back about 10 years and looked at all the election anomalies across. This is the Western world. And in every instance, certainly that I can find, where the anomalies have occurred, then they have every single one of them, like no exception, have all favoured the globalist machine candidates for political office or the political parties and so on. So now this is an unbroken sort of record. I mean, this is like, wow. Now, you'd think with election anomalies, they would just be random affairs. They would benefit this side on one day, but benefit the other side on the next. And so, no. These actually all benefit the globalist candidates. So clearly, we're not talking some random event here. We're talking about Banana Republic type behaviour. Now, not that the Western electoral system was always 100% perfect, particularly in very tightly contested elections. It's just too tempting for political forces to try and engineer an outcome, dead people voting, this sort of thing. And there have been cases in Australia where people have been, say, in a tightly contested seat where there's maybe 50, 60,000 voters and votes cast in the seat in the electoral district, and someone's registered 500 dead people to vote, and in a tightly contested election, then those 500 votes can be, the dead people voting can decide the outcome. And you only need a few of those tightly contested electoral district one, and then you've got government or not got government. So the stakes are quite high. And when you control government, you control the patronage machine, which is, of course, a huge issue when you're living in the political world, where almost everything is favours and loyalties and patronage and gifts and kickbacks and so on. So it happens, and some people have gone to prison in Australia for it, but their sentences have been very light, and it hasn't affected their future career. When I look at people in Australia that have gone to prison for election rigging, they all hold very, very well-paid, prestigious jobs today, as in salaries in excess of $1 million a year, or $2 million with bonuses and benefits. And that's not bad for someone who spent time in prison for defrauding the voters. So I went through the last 10 years. So we saw a situation where the political class had been lying to the public. So in Britain, say, the politicians, that's right, we're going to stop mass migration. We're going to just have skilled migration. Well, no, we've heard you. We're going to address your concerns. And then as soon as they got into government, they did exactly the opposite. Instead, they ramped up mass migration. They lowered the standards and the safeguards that were in place to prevent fraudulent type of migration agents and skilled migration type applications. They opened that up to massive fraud and supported, same as they did in Australia. There's a supposedly conservative government here won a crushing electoral victory some years ago now, and they were talking big and tough, we'll decide who comes to this country. We won't have illegal this, and we won't have gate crashes coming in. None of this mass migration for us. And all this talk of being swamped by Asians is just nonsense, and we won't put up with it. So they won a crushing majority right across the board. But the first thing they did when they got in office is say, this is just a huge skills shortage. The economy can't grow until we bring in the skills. And then they proceeded to import hundreds of thousands of illiterate third world peasants. They're really skilled, yeah, sure. So anyway, that when the lying sort of stopped working, and people started voting. So, for example, voting for Donald Trump in the United States in 2016, or voting for Brexit in 2015, and so on. The globalist establishment thought, well, we're going to lose if we have free and fair elections. We're going to lose control, so we have to do something about that. And this is when the election rigging machinery sort of kicked into high gear. So from that point onwards, I've looked at every election anomaly, whether it's the Arizona state election in the United States, the 2020 presidential election, quite a number of the Senate electoral races in the United States in 2020, even some of the House of Representatives electoral races in 2020, and so on. Just looking at these and looking at these anomalies. Now, in Texas, for example, was it Arizona? Excuse me, Arizona, where there was a pro-Trump candidate standing for, this is for the gubernatorial, as they call it in the United States, standing for the governor's office or the governor's election, and was standing against the pro-globalist candidate. And there was this strange anomaly with the voting machines not working on the day of the election, and the heavily favoured candidate to win didn't win. And in the districts where she was expecting, the pro-Trump candidate was expecting a very substantial majority. In those districts in particular, the voting machines just weren't working, and it was the wrong paper, and it was this and that, it had to be fixed, and so on and so forth. And it ended up that these big majorities that she was expecting didn't occur there in those areas where the voting machine. Isn't it strange? On the day of the election, they've got these terrible problems with the voting machines. And it just so happens that they're in these districts where the Republican pro-Trump candidate would have expected to make a pretty big haul of votes. But so in those areas it all went, and so the pro-globalist candidate ended up winning, not by a huge margin, but winning nonetheless, based on these incredible anomalies. On the day of the voting, all these machines breaking down. Isn't that incredible? So now they attempted to challenge it through the courts, but they could only get the legal system ensured that, or the globalist control ensured that only pro-globalist judges got to hear the case, and so on. So it actually went nowhere, but the reality was that these very strange anomalies on election day probably swung the election, and it would have been, I guess, pretty close either way, but probably swung the election. And it's just really strange. Why didn't the voting machines break down in super Democrat areas, for example? That's a bit strange. Now the list goes on. So I've gone through and just recently, for example, the regional voting in Germany, it looks like the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, these are the people that the globalist media written Nazis, Hitler, fascist, Nazi, and yet they've got, as far as I can tell, very moderate policies, such as they want to they want to get rid of mass migration and have a skills-based migration system. I mean, that's Nazi. I mean, you're kidding me, right? So they, in I think it was the state of Saxony, or Sachsen as they call it in German, they got what's referred to as a blocking majority. You can't pass legislation in that regional parliament unless these guys are on board with it, the AfD. And then after the vote was all done and finished, and so suddenly this anomaly was discovered. It's a counting error. It's a glitch, and they don't get their blocking, so they lose their blocking vote power. Isn't that incredible? It was a glitch. It was a glitch. I mean, we just didn't know. I mean, now those sort of things, things like that, the glitch, the machines breaking down. Mysterious voting patterns that have never been recognized before or seen before, where the chain of custody of ballots, voting papers that are sealed in sealed boxes, where they're moved around to various holding centres and then to the collation centre for final counting. The chain of custody there is breaking down, where you don't get people signing that they've handed it over to someone, and then someone signing they received it. That's all broken down, and there's a strange number of votes suddenly appear where that's broken down. Signature matching for mail-in ballots, and a whole bunch of things. Again, other machines breaking down. Again, strange voting patterns all over the place. These sort of things, these were very rare. These things didn't happen before the globalists started taking control of the, you just didn't see it. Now, there were, say, in rural, there's a claim in 1950s in rural Texas that there was corruption with the voting and that sort of thing. And I don't doubt those things went on, but we're talking the sheer scale of it, and always in one direction. Now, the difference between corruption on voting or affecting voting outcomes is, in election number one, it was they had control of the electoral system, and so they would stack it for themselves. But then the next time, the other guys had control, so they would stack it for themselves. So there was a general agreement that maybe it's best we don't stack it. Sometimes the temptation was too great, but there'd be a general agreement that best we don't stack it and leave it to the people to decide. Now, sometimes, again, temptation just proved too much for them, but nonetheless. So the corruption in the electoral system was at a minimal level, but now it's quite widespread. There's a determination that only the globalist candidates and pro-globalist candidates must be allowed to win. The other guys must not be allowed to win, and whatever you have to do to rig it, whether you rig it with machines, whether you rig it with fake votes, whether you have fake mail-in ballots, well, it doesn't matter. But whatever you have to do, the media is already corrupted beyond redemption. So this tinkering with and fiddling with the electoral system only goes one way. Now, just to give you a sort of wide-angle view of this, I used to do nothing but travel internationally and go to all these third world countries. Was often there when the election had occurred, and some of these elections were pretty violent, so I tended not to go out of my hotel if I could. But this idea was that in third world countries, banana republics, that they were being heavied by the US or others to have elections. They didn't really want them. They didn't like them. They were also heavy to have a widespread franchise, and as in illiterate peasants having the vote. And most of these third world countries, they were against it. They wanted a vote maybe where 20 or 25% of the population was could vote, or even less than that. And they saw no reason why they should have to share power or be subject to the will of illiterate peasants. These people can't read or write. They don't know anything. They're easily influenced by agitators, NGOs and the United Nations stirring them up and so on. So why should we let them have the vote? This is the third world sort of view of the elites in the third world. So why should we share power with these people just because the Americans are pushing us around? So they would just rig elections, and they would have a few million votes sort of in sealed cartons ready to be rolled out on demand, and then they would bribe counters, and they would just fix and rig everything so that the candidate that the elites there wanted to win. Or they would say, well, look, the Americans want Billy Bob to Jose or something to win the election, so we'll just give them a Jose as a front man, but really we're running things, and at least that'll shut the Americans up. And so they had this prearranged rigging and stacking system. And I'd be having dinner with some of these guys, and they're just casually talking about it as if it's normal as taking a stroll in the park or something. And this was pretty much wherever I went, the idea that there would be a binding vote delivered by the people. Even if the franchise was sort of all-encompassing or narrowed or small, no. We decide what's happening here, not the voters. and we'll do what we want, and just to give the impression of legitimacy, we'll create this fake election outcome, and that'll be fine. So that was their attitude. They had no concept of universal franchise, the idea of nationalism, or the idea of wanting to be a good citizen and uphold levels of probity in voting. That was a laughable proposition as far as they were concerned. And they didn't even say that. They conceded that it worked to some extent in the West, but they said, well, why should you people with power and money, why should you share power with or be subject to the whims of the little people? Why? I mean, it makes no sense to us. Now, remember, these are the corrupt elites in a third world country, but where might is right and all this sort of thing. So that was the view that they had. I mean, I kept my views to my position to myself. I didn't want to say that I believed in that sort of thing. It led to honest government. It kept corruption to a minimum. So I didn't want to go down that path, because that they may think I was taking a negative view of them. So I just didn't say, and just nodded along and smiled, gave my friendly smile. So, but in the whether you look at even the 2016 presidential election, which is why Hillary was so annoyed, was that they even, in my opinion, they stacked that. I think they added 3 or 4 million votes into Hillary's. They just got it in the wrong states. They didn't think Trump would win those closely contested states like Georgia and so on. So they stacked the votes in the wrong place, which is why Hillary got the bigger total, but lost in the key states. So, but my take is Hillary didn't get as many votes as Trump in that presidential election. They just added 3 or 4 million in, but just got it in the wrong places. Given they had that machinery and that intent to subvert already in place, it was pretty easy to make the next jump to the 2020 presidential election. But this time they weren't taking any chances, and they ginned probably 20 to 22 million votes into existence. So that's the extent that they're prepared, in my view at least, prepared to go to. And whether it's elections in Germany, whether it's elections in Britain, whether it's elections in Australia, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter anywhere where they think globalist interests are being threatened or could be threatened, or where there's a potential threat coming from a popular electoral candidate that they can't control, then they will rig the election and do what they have to do. Now, they've already got the media completely on side. The AFD are routinely referred to as being Nazis, and some of the hysterical rhetoric is, well, the Nazis are winning. Where are we going to go next? The concentration camps. I went, oh fuck! And this is all just about reducing mass migration. So this is where things. And I've gone through every election anomaly that I can find in the Western world, and every single one of them favours the globalist candidate. So this is no accident. The use of anomalies, glitches, machine errors, call it what you like. We have to, because of COVID, we have to have mail-in vote. It doesn't matter what you call it, but there is massive levels of subversion going on, and there is a standby subversion, electoral subversion machine ready, that if the globalist interests are threatened, bang, they'll put that subversion machine. Now, it's harder for them in this presidential election cycle to do it in the United States. But what do they've tried assassination, they've tried putting the candidate in prison, something they haven't given up on. In fact, it looks like they're even doubling down on that. And so what are they going to do on election day? I mean, how many counting machines are going to break down? How many mysterious truckloads of votes are going to appear in the middle of the night, and when everyone's gone, all these sort of things. So that don't think they've given up. It's just harder for them to do it. But they'll be bending their minds around this. How can we subvert it when we've got a lot more scrutiny than we had last time? And if any, if you'd say the ball was dropped in a big way, it was pretty obvious, certainly to me, and I'm not an American citizen, I wasn't voting in the election, but it's pretty obvious to me that the amount of electoral fraud that they were determined to stop Trump no matter what. Biden was unelectable, but the amount of subversion would have to be on a grand scale, given how popular Trump was, would have to be on a grand scale. So why was the Republican machine and the independent observer machine not on hyper alert, watching for fraudulent activity? Because it wasn't hard to detect, but they just didn't have the enough receipts. They had some, and they had circumstantial, they had all that sort of stuff, but they didn't have the smoking gun receipts they needed to overturn that election, or at least to invalidate the corrupt votes. So I don't think they've given up, but we need to understand that whereas in Banana Republic, third world, rigged elections were just how things work, just how it was done. You didn't do it any other way. That's now come to the West, and the globalists are determined to subvert elections in favour of the elite position, the globalist position. And why should we share power with the hoi polloi and all this sort of stuff, which is really the view, well, not really, was actually quite clearly the view of the elites in the third world countries. Why should we share power with illiterate peasants? Now in the West today, the peasant isn't illiterate. There may be a motor mechanic or an apprentice plumber or something like that. But they're now the equivalent of the illiterate peasant in the third world, and the elites in the West saying, well, hey, I went to university and did gender studies. So I'm a morally superior person to that motor mechanic. I should have a right to decide, but he should not. And that's where we're at today. You've been attached to us today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.